evening, everyone. I'm Councilwoman Joanne Ryan, calling the City of Providence Housing Crisis Task Force to order. Regular meeting, Wednesday, October 20, and it is just a little past 5 p.m. Madam Clerk, would you kindly read the roll?
Chairwoman Ryan.
Present.
Vice Chairwoman Harris is absent. Council Pro Temp Espinal is absent. Emily Friedman.
Present.
Brenda Clement.
Present.
3 present, 2 absent. We have a quorum.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I would like the record to reflect that joining us via Zoom, we have one of our presenters via Zoom, I believe. Sally, will you take your mask down and please read who is joining us on the screen there? I can't see the names. Keith Hoffman.
Yes, we have Keith Hoffman, we have Melissa from PHA, we also have Amy from, I believe, the Rhode Island Coalition, there's Laura from Hospital, and Carol Ventura from Rhode Island Housing, and
Christine Hunsinger, also from Rhode Island Housing.
Also, yeah, okay.
And Vanessa Ball from Sojourner House.
From Sojourner House. Thank
So
you.
everybody who is participating, if you can bring them, all attendees, bring them in, please, if you can. And if you can't, let me know why you can't, so that we can give them direction. Okay, well, she's working on that. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Madam Clerk, could you please read the first item into the record?
Number 1, immediate need discussion, identifying the number of unhoused and categories of homeless. The following have been invited for a presentation. Eileen Hayes, Human Health, Karen Kinsley, President and CEO of Rhode Island, Laura Jarzowski, Executive Director of Hope.
Jaworski. I had a best friend in high school named Jaworski. Probably related, who knows? Okay, so first, thank you very much for agreeing to make this presentation this evening. And do you have a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Okay, do we have that PowerPoint that we can put up on the screen for everyone?
I think everybody has a copy.
Yes, the committee has a copy. And anyone out there who needs a copy, Sally, we're going to send that out to them, correct, if they haven't already received it?
Actually part of the agenda.
Oh, it's part of the agenda. Okay, sorry. So please, start anytime you want. You have the floor.
Thank you so much.
Just state your name for the record.
Eileen Hayes from AIMPA. So thank you for allowing us to make a presentation. We were at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and what we were recognizing is that there's a lot of confusion about the numbers of unhoused folks that are on the list for shelter beds and those that are in hotels, and how many of those are Providence residents versus the state. So the other thing that we wanted to really talk through and help people understand is the process by which somebody who comes into the system gets assessed and placed on a shelter list or referred to a hotel, and that's called our coordinated entry system, and that's a statewide system. So we've asked Amy Ferguson, who is in charge of coordinated entry for the Rhode Island Coalition to End Homelessness. They have the statewide coordinated entry grant funding, and Amy is in charge of all the data, and so is going to sort of take us through the numbers and then also describe how coordinated entry works so that everybody understands the process for the entire state. That is actually kind of a HUD required process for every state that's between North Care and Rhode Island. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy to take us through the numbers, and then we're going to talk somewhat about kind of short-term, immediate, and long-term solutions.
Before Amy starts, just a foundational question here. So this first slide It has a number of, numbers on it,
Yes.
overall shelter queue. What period in time is this? Is it a point in time count?
Yes, so this is, Amy, is this the last 2 weeks or the last month? It's point in
It was the
time.
previous 2 weeks from last week, because we thought we were presenting this last, so I can get the exact dates and send it out.
Has it changed that much? Is it,
What we've seen is
No.
that there's a trend up in the last 2 months especially, so the numbers change. There's a 30-day number, and then there's a 2-week number, and then there's a week number. And we have a capacity committee meeting that meets every 2 weeks, and we have real-time numbers to keep
Okay.
track of where the lives are.
and then just another foundational
Yep.
question on statewide versus Providence.
Yep.
On the Providence numbers are not necessarily generated from Providence. Many people can just find their way into the capital
These
city.
are folks that identify Providence as being their home of origin.
Okay, thank you.
All right, go ahead.
Didn't mean to interrupt, but I
Thank
think just to digest these numbers, it's important.
Good clarifying question. Go ahead, Amy.
All right, thank you so much. Echoing Eileen's comments, thank you for having us here today to share some expertise and specifically data around the crisis that's happening across the entire state, but specifically in Providence. If you could scroll to slide 1 for me, whoever's able to do that. So in slide 1, the 2 columns on the right are capturing the data of Providence specifically, and the 2 columns on the left, the statewide, is capturing our homelessness problem across the state. The takeaway here is that 41% of our folks who are experiencing homelessness across the state are in Providence, Rhode Island. It's a fairly jarring figure to understand and digest that the bulk of our homelessness issue is in the city of Providence specifically. When you look at the spread between statewide and the city of Providence, the breakdown is similar. Individuals, the households, the children, households with adults only. So those metrics don't seem to change Providence versus statewide. But one of the correlations we're noticing is Providence has the highest eviction rate in New England and the 75th highest evicting city in the country. And in Rhode Island, this is palpable in the data that we see from day to day with the folks that we're working with. Are there any questions about this data specifically before we move on?
Committee, Brenda Clement?
Just to clarify, so this list and these numbers that we're looking at are the shelter wait list, not actual individuals in shelter.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep,
And
so that top chart is folks who are on the overall shelter queue. That's everyone who's identified as needing shelter. And that bottom chart, the outdoor or in vehicles only, is people who have identified as being outdoors or in cars. So we just
Okay.
broke it down a little further to show that issue.
And we may talk about this later on in there, but do we have the sheltered numbers as well too? Is that in this
Yes,
presentation?
Amy, you have the exact number of folks that are currently in shelter in the city?
I believe we added that to this. Yeah, if not, I can certainly report back.
I know
Okay.
it changes a little bit. but I just wanna
My
make sure.
reason for asking that, Eileen, is because I know during COVID, we reduced capacity in
Yes.
shelters.
We lost about 50 beds.
Right, and what, have we been able to restore any of those beds, and can we?
That's a good question. I think that what we are looking at is the numbers of, we thought we were gonna be able to restore some beds, and then Delta variant happened.
Yeah.
And now that we're beginning to get that under control, I know that Office of Housing and Community Development put out a capacity grant
Mhm.
to help agencies that potentially could add shelter beds if they could do things to create better airflow, things like that.
Right.
So I don't think those dollars have been allocated yet. We're still waiting for those
Right.
dollars. So I think until we know whether or not the funding's going to be there to do that, we don't think that there's any.
Okay, but I'm thinking, and again, we'll get to this discussion later, but, you know, in kind of more short-term, immediate
Yeah.
term, if we could put those 50 beds back online. You know, shelter is not my favorite option, but it's the best short-term
Yeah.
option at this stage of the game.
Right.
That
The
could
other
be,
occupation
help a lot.
that was also due Monday, or we used to call it winter shelter, but now we're calling it sort of emergency
Right.
shelter. And those are places like Harvest in Woonsocket that opens 25 beds for men. There's Crossroads and Amos House did not add winter shelter beds this year, so we won't have additional beds. Emmanuel usually adds 10 to 15 additional beds in winter. So there are a couple of other agencies that have submitted proposals. I don't know what the outcome, how many additional beds that will yield.
Okay.
We don't have those numbers yet.
And I would just like to clarify one thing. I'm sorry. We lost 146 beds, not 50. So it's a larger number that we did lose with the COVID.
146 beds statewide?
Correct.
That was statewide, yeah.
Okay, and do we know how many of those were Providence?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but I can report back happily.
Okay, thank you.
Just for example, Harrington Hall, 120 beds, 75. I know that number, so I don't know.
Can we get a chart with those numbers on it? That would be very helpful.
And you're specifically interested in a reduction in Providence?
Yeah, although I think it's helpful to see statewide, yeah.
Because it ends
Right.
up.
So you want the total number of beds in our state for shelter and the numbers reduced due to COVID?
That's correct.
Yes.
And I'm assuming that all shelter beds are full. Obviously, you wouldn't have a queue otherwise, so, okay.
Okay. Emily, did you have another question? I'm sorry.
I did. I was hoping to just get some clarification on, it appears statewide that about a third of households on the shelter queue are in places not meant for human habitation, outdoors, or sleeping in vehicles. The other 2/3, can you describe what the common caller or person on the wait list, what that situation is? Are they doubled up? Where are they?
Yes, Amy has
Yep. So a lot of folks are doubled up or at risk, Category 2, federal definition of homelessness. They're at risk of homelessness. So they are about to lose their housing within 14 days. And they're burning all their bridges, and they know they're on their last bridge. Say that again?
You were breaking up. I didn't know that.
Could you repeat what you said? We didn't hear it all.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so most of the folks on the list outside of these outside stayers or who are in vehicles are people who are at risk of homelessness. So they call us and let us know that they are going to be homeless within 14 days of calling. So they're doubled up. They have received an eviction notice. They've received some sort of vacate notice, and they have 14 days between the time, at least 14 days between when they've called.
Yeah. Okay, we get that.
On the street or in their car.
Can I tag on to your question, Emily? So the chart at the bottom on this chart is, because I was reading it as adding 278 and plus 119, but 119 is really included already in the 276. Is that correct? It's just breaking out it's just a subset. Okay, all right, sorry. Yeah, no,
So everybody's clear on that?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
The other thing that I wanted to just note on the topic, we work with the Department of Health to have them go into all of our shelters who were willing to help them understand how to increase their capacity. The plans that we got back or guidance that we got back from the Department of Health wasn't super intentional in a way that we were hoping it would say, like, add 5 beds by this date, 10 beds by that date, 12 beds by whatever date. And the capacity issue really is what Eileen mentioned before of like just helping to improve airflow, et cetera, to make it safe for folks to return back to increased numbers within those congregate settings.
Brenda?
And then I think the other thing is that a lot of the folks that are living outside have, for many reasons, a lot of it related to COVID and health issues, do not want to go into shelter. They're afraid of going into shelter, and that's partly why they're sleeping in cars and other places, not necessarily.
Please continue.
All right, if we can move on to the next slide, please. So the next slide is what we intend to be a pretty high-level overview of coordinated entry just to kind of knowledge us up to the same level. So in the gold is the coordinated entry process, and then I'm going to walk us through the reality of what coordinated entry is and is not. So when folks are at risk or experiencing homelessness, they call us. So that first gold bubble there, we have 187 people in Providence sleeping outside or in cars. They do an intake with the coordinated entry system by way of call, text, chat, or in person. And then at the same time, all of our shelter providers across the state are reporting their vacancies to us. So from Westerly to Woonsocket to Aquidneck Island and everywhere in between, we're getting real-time updates of we have 3 beds available here, we have 1 bed here, we have 2 beds there. At that point, it's our obligation mentioned before to ensure that we're referring the highest acuity folks to those beds that are available across the state. It's not a first come, first served system. It's not whoever has the loudest voice or the loudest advocate or you name it. So then when you look down at that blue line there, the reality of what our issue is, we have 456 people across the state sleeping outside or in cars. They call us, we determine their eligibility and their acuity, which determines how quickly they will or will not be able to access shelter. Across the on average, we only have 7 shelter beds that become available per day, 3 of which are in Providence. We often find that folks want to stay in their community of origin, so it's not likely that someone from Providence is willing to go to Woonsocket or Westerly or over to McKinney's shelter in Newport. They want to stay in Providence. So in this scenario, we have 187 people in Providence who are outside or in cars, and every day we have on average 3 beds to offer them. And we are tasked again with the responsibility of making sure that the highest acuity people are accessing those beds, again, not the loudest, not the best advocate, et cetera. So this demonstrates just the huge gap that we have across the entire state, but specifically in Providence. We assume that most people want to stay in the Providence area. Hall in that assumption, just because it's a bit more accessible. But those 187 people, very few would be willing to go to our outlying regions.
Amy, we had trouble hearing your last comment. You said you assumed that these folks wanted to stay where? Where did they want to stay?
In their area of origin. So it's not likely that if we have a bed available in Newport, that folks from Providence want to go to Newport.
Okay. All right. Having trouble with her. She's connection is bad.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Amy, maybe if you turn off your camera, that will help. So you already thought about that. So, Amy, can you talk?
Hold on, just one second, please. Emily, you had your hand raised. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was hoping for the benefit of the record and folks tuning in, could we define, when we talk about high acuity, what type of factors would help you score higher? What constitutes high acuity, if you don't mind?
There's an assessment done that looks at health issues, looks at length of time homeless. Chronic homeless folks are higher acuity, mental health issues, hospitalization, domestic violence. All those criteria give you a higher score. So we rate people on kind of a lower score, right into housing. Middle score, we're looking for rental assistance, often rapid rehousing, and the higher score means that you're going to need supportive services going to your house. So it's people that have lots of vulnerability in terms of their medical, physical, mental health issues.
How are households with children handled any differently in that system, or?
I let Amy answer that, but what I do know is that families don't tend to be chronic, so they don't tend to have a high score in terms of chronicity.
It is the same assessment that's used for families and individuals. When we are dealing with a family, the questions are just essentially opened up to any household chronically homeless. Does anyone in the household have a physical disability? So it allows for essentially more vulnerability and more flexibility. If you have a family of 6, you're asking if any of those 6 people have chronic homelessness or disability, et cetera.
Do you also screen for?
Brenda Clement, please,
I'm
just
sorry,
so everybody
Madam
knows
Chair.
who, that's okay.
Yeah, I keep forgetting.
That's all right.
Do you also screen on families for DCYF involvement or engagement?
No.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Please continue, Amy.
Thank you. Going on to the next slide. Next slide, someone. Thanks. So the next couple slides really are just continuing to break down the data to show the variance between Providence-based homelessness and statewide-based homelessness. So in green is our Providence population, and in purple is the rest of the state. So we have 79 individuals in Providence experience versus across the state. We have 37 families without children. So this is like couples with no children in Providence versus 55 throughout the state. We have 71 households with children in Providence experiencing unsheltered homelessness, and 104 throughout the span of the state. So the variance isn't great. We're seeing similar household metrics across the state as we are just in Providence alone.
Questions on this slide, committee? Please continue, Amy.
Thank you. Next slide. Could you go back one? Sorry, you skipped one. Thank you. So this slide shows our crisis assessment score breakdown. Our crisis assessment is the scale that we use to rank people's acuity and vulnerability for shelter. Typically, we operate that if you score 5 or higher on that crisis assessment, you do wind up on what is, in layman's term, our shelter wait list. Anyone who scores 0 to 4, we don't typically put them on the wait list, really because we know it's a wait list to nowhere, and there's just not an opportunity to really ever get those folks into shelter. So what this shows is that if we had enough beds, we would be referring 138 folks to shelter if the beds were available, and that's those purple metrics. So there's a great need across.
And again,
Okay.
can I clarify, that was in that 2-week period of time that we were capturing?
I think we're gonna ask, I think that this whole packet is for that 2-week period in time.
Yeah.
But I think we need to have Amy call in. Madam Clerk, am I right or am I wrong? What do we do here? Because.
Is she almost done? I think she's almost done.
I think it's gonna take one more slide.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try to power through this then. Amy, just so that you know, on our end, you keep breaking up. So I don't want you to think that we're not listening, but you break up quite often. So, but please continue.
Thank you. Sorry about that. The next slide is our housing assessment scores of folks staying outside in vehicles. So similar to the way we prioritize people for shelter, we also prioritize them based on acuity for housing. The furthest graph to the right, that 30+ permanent supportive housing, that is the folks who need the highest form of intervention, meaning they need a permanent supportive services to successfully exit homelessness and not return to homelessness. Our folks who are scoring rapid rehousing, they need an intervention that has a more temporary subsidy up to 24 months, really on a case-by-case basis. And at the end of the time of their subsidy, their supportive services also end. And then our folks who score 15 to 19 on this assessment are folks who need a mainstream housing resource. So this could be like an EHV, emergency housing voucher, or an HCVP, or 0 to 14 folks. These are folks who will never get a housing referral from our system, and they just need some sort of light support to resolve their homelessness and exit their homelessness without much of an investment from our system.
Committee members, any questions on this slide? No? Please continue, Amy.
Thank you. So most of the folks who are in our encampments are long-term or chronically homeless, so they are more like intervention of permanent supportive housing.
I'm wanting to fill it.
Thanks, Eileen. Sorry.
She's reading your mind.
And this last slide, I think, Laura, you're taking.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Jaworski. I'm the Executive Director for House of Hope CDC. We are a homeless service provider and affordable housing developer, for those of you that don't know us, and do that work all across the state. I wanted to just piggyback that last piece that Amy had talked about, the folks that are experiencing chronic homelessness, so that long-term homelessness that need the highest level of supports are really the folks that House of Hope are seeing and work with the most. So of over the 1,000 people that we worked with last year, almost 700 of them were experiencing chronic homelessness. And a lot of that work is done through our street-based outreach team, primarily here in the city of Providence, but also in Pawtucket, Cranston, West Warwick, and then other cities as well. So that street outreach team, or through our Shower to Empower mobile truck that is in and around the city of Providence, but also in Pawtucket. I also want to preface and start this off with, these are solutions that have been come up not from like Laura at the House of Hope, but not just the logos on the cover sheet of this slide deck, but a real coalition of homeless service providers that have been working together even pre-COVID, but really trying to drive home some solutions that are applicable not just in the city of Providence, but statewide as well. And that first sentence really to also preface is that homelessness is absolutely a policy choice. It's not a personal choice. And so it's really important, I think, to offer up policy solutions of levers that we could pull, so to speak, in order to address homelessness crisis, so that we can achieve what you see there, another jargon term, virtual zero, or what is also known as functional zero. And what that really means is that we know that folks will always be faced with a housing crisis or a homelessness crisis. But what we can do as a society is create solutions so that when somebody raises their hand and says, I really need help, they don't end up in a long-term chronic homelessness situation. They reach out, they ask for help, and they get the help that they need. And so here are sort of three categories of solutions that we really feel would be well advised for the task force to take up and to strongly consider as they're looking at solving this issue here in the city of Providence. The first bucket is homelessness prevention and diversion. So this is really a bucket of solutions to really help stem the tide. So what can we do for the folks that really don't need that lower acuity, who really don't need a lot of support, a lot of intensive services? They need a one-time or minimal touch support, and it will keep them out of our homeless shelter system and keep them housed, really. So these are things like implementing an eviction moratorium, right? So like, let's keep people in their housing where we know that they are best served and safe by and large. Let's offer some flexible rental assistance for them so that, yes, they can get rapidly housed and out of the shelters, but then they can also stay housed safely. So using tools like we have in play right now through like Rent Relief, Rhode Island, which is helping a ton of people. But then also those funds to divert people from coming into shelter. So doing things like, I need first and security in order to get an apartment. And that's really all I need. And I'll be on my way and don't need any more assistance. The one piece I would also add is we see this a lot at House of Hope because we're serving folks that are chronically homeless. Many of the people that we're working with are staying in an RV or in a car, and they need more untraditional means of diversion. So they may need something like a propane tank to help keep their RV operating, and that is all that they're going to need while they're then waiting to get into the shelter wait list. So we really try to work to make sure that we're pairing in those resources. So having some flexible dollars to do that, to divert them, to keep them out of the shelter system is really critical as well. And then lastly, we as leaders of these organizations are also really concerned, as always, about the staff that we have that have been working on the front lines, particularly in this pandemic. So we really want to make sure that we're continuing to attract staff, but also to retain staff who are doing this frontline work when they're helping to do case management services, but when they're also trying to get folks out the door and identifying units to rent, having conversations with landlords, attracting those units, making connections for folks that they're working with, and matching them with landlords. I'll come up for air for a minute in case there are any questions. I know I can't see the room well, but I'll pause there.
Any members? Amy? Emily, I'm sorry.
Thank you. In terms of bullet number 2, the flexible rental assistance funds, Laura, you had referenced that there's a sizable allocation for rent relief RI, approximately close to $200 million currently out there. The city has also invested approximately $1.4 million in rapid rehousing. When you speak about flexible rental assistance, are those existing programs insufficient? Do they lack flexibility? Can you expound on sort of what is the gap there that we could be filling?
So I think it's just reminding ourselves that we are in a scenario of really desperate housing vacancy, right? We're at like 2% vacancy rates. And so it's about making sure that we are making rental assistance dollars available to people that are as flexible as possible, right? So a lot of the challenges that we really struggled with, I think initially, of getting these dollars into hands of people that needed them, to just make sure that we're keeping the red tape to a minimum, and making sure that we're hearing too from when people are denied that rental assistance, that we're really taking those considerations into effect to see if, hey, do we need to pause and look at our policies here and see if we can further help people. So continuing to have that cycle of feedback so that the most amount of people can receive that, and not just like, so to speak, a traditional, I just need first and security, but maybe there's a little bit more to glean from people who don't qualify, or maybe there's something in the eligibility criteria or even in the application itself. So it's just making sure that system is flexible to responding to people's needs, to make sure we maximize who is eligible for those dollars. I don't know, Eileen, would you add anything to that?
Eileen, please continue.
Yeah, what I would add is that there definitely is more flexibility with rent relief now than when it originally opened up. Avis House, the warm shelter, House of Hope, we alone spent $95,000 on rental assistance past year and Rhode Island Foundation helped a lot of us be able to do that, because getting through the process is one of the biggest barriers. And it's gotten better, but a lot of our folks don't fit the box exactly as the box is designed, and they get really scared waiting because they often have to wait a while. And I know, again, it's gotten much better. We're seeing it's gotten more results, but also having diversion money, quickly being able to pay. A landlord's not going to wait because the housing market is wait. And if they're being told they have to wait 6 weeks for that first month's rent and security, they're going to go to the next potential tenant. We're also running a statewide landlord incentive program. We're actually giving people $2,000 for apartments, landlord, and then $500 for an additional unit, and up to $2,000 for repairs. And in 6 months, we've gotten maybe 40 apartments put online. There's such a small amount. There's just virtually, and every time we get an apartment online, we have 50 people showing up for it.
Wow.
So that's one of the major issues.
Can I ask, so you talked about the process, and you said that it was made more streamlined or easier. Can you talk about that process at all? Who manages it? Who administers it?
On the line. Rhode Island Housing manages the rent relief program, and in a couple of months ago, the Biden administration changed the regulations where people can self-attest to being with their not having worked, and so some of the things required documents they were able to self-attest, and that definitely has made a difference. Per personally, I think the money should be broken up more to some of the smaller community agencies, because many of our folks come to us because they feel safe with us. But part of the issue is that there's an entire regulation that's required by the funding of all the backup documentation, and it has to be run in the way that is designed, or we could lose, we could pay back the money. It's federal funding. But I think that breaking that up to small.
So Rhode Island Housing controls all of the Rhode Island bucket.
Yeah.
Is Carol Ventura from Rhode Island Housing on? Can she speak to us about how they're doing and what they're working on to make it more?
She was on and Chris was on before, and I don't know if they still are.
So we got Keith Hoffman is asking a question.
We have another hand.
Scroll down at the bottom under Amy. Is Carol still on? I don't know.
Hi all.
But-
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Laura, for the presentation. I thought it was really, really fantastic and eye-opening. There was one small thing that I wanted to.
Can I just ask you to identify yourself for the record? Who is speaking?
Oh, Keith Hoffman from the Attorney General's office.
Great. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Councilwoman, and yeah, thank you all again for creating this task force on such an incredibly important topic. Inviting the Attorney General's office to be a part of it. One of the solutions that we've looked to, a potential solution that I think would fit under the homelessness prevention and diversion category is this idea of a pre-filing eviction diversion program. I don't know if you have anything about that, Laura, but I would, there are a number of forms that such a program can take. They're in place all across the country now. They've been set up in response to some of the really large potential rise in evictions that we could see as a result of the pandemic. And the National Center for State Courts, which is a major nonpartisan resource for state courts, has a whole website dedicated to eviction diversion programs and the sorts of eviction diversion programs that courts can set up. So I would just direct anybody who's interested in that potential remedy to take a look. And the thing about a moratorium is that which certainly has been and can be a lifeline to so many people, and it's so important. But at some point it will end, and an eviction diversion program would be something that would allow people and landlords to ensure that evictions don't happen for no reason, to ensure that tenants are not blacklisted through the eviction court filing. So that a pre-filing diversion program would take care of a lot of issues, and would just encourage people to take a look at the National Center for State Courts.
Thank you, Keith. If there's any information, Keith, on the programs that you spoke about, if you can send that to Sally in the council office, and we can distribute that to the group, that would be wonderful. We appreciate that contribution. Keith, did you hear that?
Absolutely. I'll send this to Sally. I think I have her email. So absolutely, Councilwoman. Thank you.
Wonderful. Any questions for Keith? No? Okay. Thank you, Keith. We're having trouble getting Carol Ventura, the ED from Rhode Island Housing. However, we're successfully admitted Christine Hunsinger, and
She can speak, but for some reason
I'm on.
Carol, you there?
I'm on, Councilwoman.
Wonderful. Good to hear from you. Big hello to Carol.
Hi, Carol.
Hi,
Hey,
Carol.
everyone. I
Thank
gotta tell
you
you though,
for your hard
Councilwoman, I have some construction going on in the background, so it might be a little bit
Like
loud.
construction. Construction is good.
It is.
So Carol, I'm sure you heard us talking about rent relief RI, and we understand that you administer, Rhode Island Housing administers that program.
We do.
Can you just share with us where you're at, how you're doing, and where you're going with that program?
Yeah, so we've made great progress, and I know Christine Hunsinger is on, Councilwoman. She actually spearheads that program for the agency. We are, I think last I looked today with a bulk payment we made to National Grid, we're at like almost $60 million that we've paid out. And as you might imagine, a lot of this is concentrated in our urban core, right? That's where a lot of the poverty is, where a lot of the need is. So the great thing about rent relief is we not only can pay arrearages for people who are behind on their rent and utilities, we can pay forward-facing expenses. So I know that the rent relief team has used the federal funds to provide security deposits and also to pay forward-facing rent. So there's a wholesale effort to try to make sure that people stay in their homes. Those people that are exiting, for example, the hotel program or shelter, that they can find an apartment and they can move into an apartment instead of having to live in that uncertain environment of shelter or automobile or hotel room. So I think we're doing a great job. There's a lot of money there, and I think we can do more. We just have to keep spreading the word and working with terrific partners like we have with us today.
So what's the total allocation for Rhode Island for rent relief?
$352 million.
Oh, she's adding the other extra money, but the original money was 200, but that's fine.
Okay, hold on a second. So Brenda
No,
Clement.
it doesn't matter. You're adding the new money too, so.
Well, because it's part of the pot of money.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So, I'm sorry, so what's the total amount of dollars that are available to Rhode Island in this program?
200 million in the first bucket, 152 million in the second bucket, $352 million in total.
Total, okay, perfect. And to date, about 60 million paid out?
A little bit, I think closer to 65 million with the grid. I think Chris is on. Chris, are you on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, is that correct, Chris? You know the numbers like the back of your hand.
Yeah, so $44 million have gone out through the traditional program, and then 16 for grid. So we're at 60 right now. We do just about on average $1 million in approvals a day. That does include the dollars that we've approved for security deposit and forward-facing rent that haven't actually been obligated with a lease, but there's another $900,000 there that's available for those folks who've gotten that pre-approval letter. So there's a bunch of different expenses, but so we're at 60 today, and by the end of the week we'll be at 63. So we can keep going.
Okay.
One other thing I'd like to mention, Councilwoman, is we're also working with our PHA partners, the housing authorities, and developers of affordable housing, folks that own, some of our tax credit developments, to do a one-stop payment for the owners of these properties. They're doing the on-the-ground work of making sure that we have documentation for each resident that's behind, and then we make one payment into the development. So we've done this before, and I think it's going to be successful, and I think it's going to save a lot of time and effort. And I see my colleague Melissa shaking her head yes over there at Providence Housing Authority.
Great. Committee members, any questions? Brenda Clement.
So Christine and or Carol, can you talk a little bit about the court work and the work that you're doing with the Center for Justice and Eviction Court?
Chris?
Sure. So we are located in each court throughout the state. We've got representatives that sit at a table that can provide information. But more importantly, what they can do is help that person who's walking in either complete an application, check their status, or start an application. So in instances where we've had landlords that were unreachable or who, for whatever reason, didn't want to participate, the staff that's at those tables was very compelling, and they've talked a number of landlords into it at the last minute. And so
we have judges come out of the courtroom and come over to the table, work with the reps to figure out where people are in the process, what the likelihood of them being able to get paid is. We notify the court once a case is resolved and that payment's been made, the landlord's been made whole, so they know to dismiss the eviction case. So at that last point where someone's walking in and they're about to receive a judgment that will force them out of their home, we're there. And it has been a hugely successful part of the rent relief program overall. We're also partnering with Center for Justice and Rhode Island Legal Services, so tenants have representation in court. We know that when tenants have representation, they fare better. Everybody's got to follow the rules and all of that, where that sometimes doesn't happen where you don't have a lawyer. So we are very proud of that program, and it has gone a long way to keep a lot of the 5,700 families that have been allowed to stay in their home because of this program. That they're responsible for a lot of it, and the court's been a great partner too.
Committee members, anyone else? Brenda, continue.
So yes, I agree. The program, and as you know, the city here has been supporting some of those efforts as well too through the Right to Counsel program, through the mayor's office as well. It's a program that needs to be permanent, not just during COVID, but that's a discussion. That's another solution, I think, in the long term. But to Eileen's point earlier about a number of the people that folks that Laura sees and that Eileen sees and others are still not fitting into the boxes under rent relief. So love your comments and your thoughts about that, Christine. I realize that while there's been lots of relaxation of a number of the rules from Treasury, it is still a pretty specific program. So are there other thoughts or ideas that you have about how we can either fine-tune this program or how we use some of the other federal dollars to create that more flexible pot of money? So just appreciate your thoughts from doing this daily now.
Sure. I can really only speak to the rent relief program. It was an emergency program created mostly for people who lost their job or lost income, a second job or something like that due to COVID. That was the original pot of money, and those are the guidelines. So it is not a program that solves all issues, right? Particularly on the chronically homeless side, we struggle to fit them into the box. And we've sat with a number of those clients with a number of great partners helping us fill out applications and get them to the point where we can pre-approve for security and forward facing. So if they can find an apartment, we can be a resource. The problem is in that population, we have trouble then reaching them again, right? So cell phones and emails are not widely used. Sometimes partners lose touch with them for a period of time too. So we have a little bit of trouble in using these dollars to help that population or to meet that population where they are. So I will admit that that's a gap. I think for renters overall, the two pots of money work in conjunction with each other. So a financial hardship due to COVID is the first one. If it's not due to COVID but was experienced during COVID, then we use the second pot. And so folks who are renters who are reachable, we can most of the time help those folks. But the chronically homeless population is very difficult with these dollars.
Please, can you also just, I know some of these answers, but just for purpose to put it on the record, can you talk too about the time frame of when these monies have to be spent, and then obviously I know federal government is already starting to reallocate some of that funding on the federal level as well. So can you just put comment for that for the record?
Sure. By the end of 2022 is when we have an opportunity to spend these dollars. There's different clawback periods. There's different benchmarks we have to make. So far we are on track, but it's $352 million in a state with just over 1 million people. So it is a lot of money targeted at a very specific population. So 2022 is when these dollars are supposed to run out. Above my pay grade to guess what Congress will do as far as extensions and clawing back.
Anyone else? Committee members? So what is the next benchmark that you need to achieve as far as getting these dollars out? When will that happen and what is it?
Yeah, so it's the end of November. We will have had to spend, I think the percentage is 40%, but I know the number very well in my head. So we will have to hit $7 million by the end of November. We are on track to hit that.
Okay. What about expanding partners? I think, Eileen spoke about, some of the challenges. Have we exhausted partners to help us get those dollars out?
So we are working with the governor's office to discuss and to design an RFP that would bring more partners into the fold. So that is something that the governor's office is working on. We've heard the feedback that it should be different partners, and so they've allocated additional resources to fund that effort. But we're working closely with the governor's office and the Lieutenant Governor Equity Council to make sure that the RFP is designed in such a way that it opens doors for partners who may not traditionally apply or may not have been comfortable applying the last time.
So I think the start number here is the 75th highest evicting city in the United States. That number is huge. Was it that high before COVID?
Pre-COVID, I'm sorry, I didn't know who.
Pre-COVID, was that number the same or less? I mean,
it's actually less.
Pardon me?
So pre-COVID, it was roughly 8,000 people a year that were evicted. Right now, it is 70% below that. So the program is working. Other efforts are working. So the rate of evictions right now is down significantly from pre-COVID times. 5-year pre-COVID average was roughly 8,000 people a year were evicted in the state.
Madam Chair, there's a lot of great data, including some of that historical data on Eviction Lab's website. So we're happy to share that, but Chris is accurate in her comments. So.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Continue, Brenda, please.
I'm gonna remember to raise my hand.
That's okay. Jump right in.
But I mean. And this is all great work, and Rhode Island Housing and Christine have done great work getting this money out the door. I agree, we need to continue to expand, but I'm looking back at the chart that Amy walked us through, and the reality is that for the bulk of the people on this number, this program's not going to work. So this program needs to continue because we need to prevent people from coming into the shelter system. So keep up the good work, Christine, keep up all of the hard work, Carol, but I think we need to focus on how do we get these people who are on the street right now off the street. And that's, I think, the main focus of this group as well. But
well, our primary focus right now, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that was interesting. Christine and Carol, thank you very much. Thank you for your hard work. Carol, your hand is up. Do you want to speak again?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say, Councilwoman, is probably just echoing what, what Brenda has said. We have, setting aside the COVID crisis, we have a lot of poor people in Rhode Island, right? And a lot of those poor people live in the city of Providence, and it's about having rental subsidies long-term and about having, service dollars to be able to support people in their housing. It's a matter of all of those factors coming together. And I think we have a unique opportunity right now with the leadership we have in the state. We have a lot of resources coming down, both from the federal government, the governor's budget, the governor's supplemental budget. And so I think now's the time to, and I congratulate all of you for creating this task force, because I think now's the time where you can really make a difference if we all come together and we strategize about how we best use these funds.
Agreed.
Well said, Carol. Now we know why you're the ED of Rhode Island Housing. We do need to get some money from the state, and we all need to come together and work together. We have the resources, we have the capacity, and we have a remarkable organization or a group of organizations that deal with housing. So I'm sure that we're gonna figure this out. So thank you very much. Thank you, Rhode Island Housing, for being here and your hard work. Okay. Next. We were talking, okay, so we finished homelessness, prevention, and diversion.
Yeah, Laura needs to be back. Go ahead, Laura.
So, is it Laura? Laura, continue,
Yes, Madam Chair,
please.
I'm still here. Thank you, Councilwoman. I think, I want to give snaps and echo to all of what's being said from our great partners. Absolutely, that is what is needed in terms of resources and solutions. But they're not hitting.
Laura, who's that?
This is my son, Vincent. You want to say hi?
Now it'll be shy.
Vincent, thank you for joining us this evening. I hope that you're enjoying yourself.
Parenthood in action. I think one of the things we need to, and Carol sort of started to allude to this too, about, we have this great unprecedented time to get these resources out for really solutions that people really need. And I think there are also a lot of really creative and innovative solutions that are being done all around the country right now through this pandemic, and ideas that we have also generated here in the state of Rhode Island. And that's really in this next category and bucket of how do we create more housing, right? Either more emergency, like what Brenda was talking about right now for tonight, so that my outreach team that's working with people for those almost 200 folks in the city of Providence can get them into a space right away. But of course, we all recognize the longer term solutions, and that's we just don't simply have enough housing, and we haven't invested enough over the long term, and we're really feeling the even more acute effects of that right now because of the pandemic, unfortunately. So one of the tools that's being utilized all across the country, most visibly in the state of California, I think it's called Hotel Room Key, but we've been doing it here in Rhode Island, and that's through the partnerships working with local hotels and motels. Motel system has been a system that has been an invaluable resource even pre-COVID, when we were able to put people up in a motel, but even people themselves that have really low income. It was an inexpensive way for them to have shelter over their head and in a space that they could control, particularly when we're talking about people who have also experienced a lot of trauma in their lives. Being able to be in a smaller, more manageable spaces that they can maintain goes a long way. So one of the challenges, however, that we've seen during COVID has been the effects of COVID. A lot of hotels weren't operating in the beginning of this pandemic. They were shut down immediately. Then they were experiencing a lot of challenges with staffing. And so the homeless service system, with some leadership through our homeless response team in the state, we really worked hard to partner with hotels to get a whole block of hotel rooms in a larger scale. And that has happened throughout the last 18 months. And Eileen can attest a little more detail as to her experience as well. House of Hope, we operated the quarantine and isolation facility at the Wyndham in Warwick for a period of time. So we have some experience there too. But really what is a solution that can be brought to bear here is the relationships that the city may have, or being able to broker the conversations with other hotel providers. We often would approach a hotel and they know what we're representing and where we're coming from. And we oftentimes aren't able to be successful in brokering those relationships. And so oftentimes when it comes from a different mouthpiece, that's a much more successful partnership to encourage hotels and we can get creative around incentivizing or what have you. But to really encourage hotels to be partnering with the homeless service provider system. There's a great natural already existing infrastructure in place. You have buildings with a lot of rooms, with bathrooms, with showers that are warm and have beds. So there's a real natural symbiotic relationship to be had there and leveraging some more of those resources in and around the city. The second is, and I think Emily's likely gonna be taking this up later on the agenda, but it also speaks to the relationship that the city has in looking at unused, vacant, or underutilized properties throughout the city. That might be within the city's own portfolio, but it might even be taking a look at any other properties that might be available and brokering those conversations with the state or even with private owners as well, to see how those properties could be acquired and rehabbed and repurposed, either as short-term emergency housing to meet the immediate crisis, but to even be converted for long-term, more permanent housing. The last thing I would add to is listening and thinking about creative solutions. And this one is personal for me. We at House of Hope have been working hard over the last year to create Echo Village, which is temporary emergency housing, utilizing what are called pallet structures, or pallet units, or personal sleeping enclosures that create a safe place for somebody to sleep, so they're off of the streets and out of their cars. They're meant as a temporary space for someone to sleep in until more permanent housing can be constructed. They're intentionally built as a sleeping enclosure space. It's heated, it's cooled, it's powered, and it has a door that locks. Most of the most incredible things that people that we meet and encounter on the streets really need, most importantly, the locking door. And so having talked with our constituents when we were coming up with this concept, they really were rallying behind this as a solution to not just get them off of the streets, out of tents, out of cars, but it would also be an incredibly effective COVID mitigating strategy because you are controlling your own little pod space, thereby not being exposed to other individuals as you are maybe in other large congregate hotel settings, shelter settings, where you're in a room with maybe 50 or 60 other people in a wide open aired space. So we have been working hard to try to get this program implemented. We are proposing 30 of these pallet structures to house 60 people temporarily until we can get them into permanent housing, most likely those permanent supportive housing units that we've talked about. But that takes time to get constructed. And so we really need help to bring this online. And that help is by identifying a location for this village to be stood up. I'm going to pause there now. I want to recognize time if anyone has any questions.
Laura, question. How much does it cost for one of these pods or pallet houses?
They make two different sizes. They make a 64 square foot structure and a 100 square foot structure. We're looking at the 64 square foot at baseline. That's about $7,500 a piece. The program that we've constructed and built out, as I had mentioned, using 30 of these to provide housing for 60 people. When you build in, the food that we'd be providing, the case management services and whatnot, that breaks down to about $75 per person per night.
How much was that
Cost.
again? Say that again.
$75 per person per night. And that figure can fluctuate a bit depending on the location. We've worked through a couple of different locations for this project, depending on what the infrastructure of that space requires. We can get that dollar down to $50, the per night cost down to $50 per night. So a lot of it depends on like if I have to pay rent for a building or pay to have it rehabbed or whatnot.
So this program is in development. You don't have any of these structures built? No prototypes?
I actually have a prototype sitting on the lawn of our offices down in Apponaug and Warwick, if anyone would like to come take a look. I have 10 of them that I've prepaid for already. I've raised a significant amount of capital to purchase additional units. I have significant funding commitments from city and state funders. The last piece I need is a location.
Have you scoped out locations?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Everybody at the table is laughing.
Everybody knows I'm Yes, ma'am. We've actually tried to work through four different locations, 2 in the city of Pawtucket, and then when we brought it to the city of Providence, 2 here, with the last being met with community opposition. And so we were unsuccessful in implementation.
Please tell me the names of the locations in Providence.
Sure. The first location in Providence was actually over in Onlyville. We were looking to purchase a property with a private developer. It was actually going to be a really interesting model where the phase 1 was the purchase of the property by a developer. We would temporarily have our shelter project there. And the second phase would be working with another one of our nonprofit developer partners, One Neighborhood Builders, and they would be working with the developer to construct permanent supportive housing in the additional parts of the building. Unfortunately, the purchase and sales fell through at the last minute, so we were unsuccessful in being able to utilize that location. And then this summer, the location that we had moved to pursuing was at 545 Prairie Avenue on the corner of Prairie and Thurbers.
And you were met with community resistance, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we spent about 3 months door knocking, going door to door, talking with neighbors, both businesses and citizens, sharing with them what our intentions were for the project, answering and fielding questions. And then we had a community meeting that we had been invited to, and we were met with community opposition.
Okay. Is there any zoning concerns or limitations?
So depending on the zoning of the building itself, with I think only 2 or 3 exceptions, we would be allowed to do temporary emergency housing by right within most zoning uses here in the city of Providence.
Okay.
So the zoning official has been fantastic. Alexis is well aware of this project and has been fully supportive and has educated me a great deal about that temporary emergency housing by right component. So when we've been searching for properties with those a couple of exceptions, that's been a really key factor.
Okay.
And Emily's been really helpful too in the planning department, really to educating.
Maybe Emily could pick up and talk about some of the challenges to finding locations, because it seems like this is a great solution, not very expensive.
Absolutely. So this.
What are the challenges?
Sure. So, as Laura mentioned, House of Hope has been working and really doggedly pursuing this project for close to 2 years now. First in Pawtucket, now in Providence, has navigated the code requirements. And at this point, what's needed is really a willing landlord or seller, a space that fits their space needs. This pallet shelter model obviously requires an open floor plan, the ability to bring the pallet shelters in, a higher ceiling. We also really need a reasonable level of neighborhood support. It is not a funding issue. It is not a zoning issue at this point. It is really just, we need to find a location. And Laura, I believe you could be operational within a matter of weeks if a location was secured.
These take about 4 weeks to come in from Washington State. I would take those 4 weeks waiting time to get the building prepped and ready. Each unit can be assembled in less than 30 minutes with minimal tools. And then it would just be a couple of weeks. As Emily mentioned, we've been working on this for quite some time. I've got program policies and procedures ready to go. I've got job descriptions ready to go. I've got significant funding. I've done significant dog and pony shows on this project. So everybody around the table thinks it's fantastic. And I could, in theory, get this project up and running in just a couple of months. So if somebody walked up to me today, I could deliver this before Christmas.
Could you put, which is very important because the winter is coming and
yes.
We are going into crisis mode. I think we're in crisis mode. Laura, please put a package together of the program, pictures, details, and circulate it. Please provide it to Sally and get that distributed to our group here. Brenda Clement has a question.
Can I just clarify on the space requirements you need of what, about 10,000 square feet?
For 30 pallet structures, we've been advised to seek out about 10,000 square feet of space. I am now even entertaining smaller mini villages, if you will. So if I have to look at a 5,000 square foot space and put less structures in, I'm willing to do that as long as we can also get this up to scale. Given the crisis that we're facing, it's really critical that yes, it matters to even one person, but there's so many people. This project originally even started out at serving 100 and now it's down to 60. I'd love to set up mini villages, so I'm willing to even be more creative and flexible. So for 30 units, I need 10,000 square feet of space on a bus line. Those are kind of the two biggest things. So
And the-
empty
the
warehouses,
beauty of-
big box stores, those kinds of things.
Yeah, and the beauty of this model, as you've already pointed out, Madam Chair, is that it really addresses that again, to the chart, the people who, are chronically homeless, people who are the hardest to house, and if we keep all of the other programs going, like rent relief and others, that prevents people from coming in to the shelter, this is where we can deal with the most challenging population. So,
I do think it's a really important piece of.
I agree. So did Laura.
Okay.
I think that the component piece is that a critical piece, if I can, is there a lot of the folks that we're seeing in our street outreach work, a lot of the folks that are walking into Amos house, are folks that are not able to go into the current shelter system as it exists right now. And so we have been really intentional about how we've designed this program so that these folks can come in and have stable housing, albeit not in the traditional sense, but a safe, secure, consistent place to stay with a provider that's really well tuned and an expert in working and knows most of these folks for quite some time. And work to get them to the journey of housing. My intention, Brenda, I feel the same way. I don't ever thought I would be advocating for more shelter, but we're in these really crazy times and it's what's really needed. And it's a really critical bridge that can be built until we get these more housing units online, because there's a huge gap and expanse and between when housing can be constructed and what we do tonight.
Yeah.
These units come with support services as well, correct?
We would be constructing the village and we would be bringing in absolutely our case management team on site. So we would have on-site staff awake 24/7. We have experience operating large scale shelters. We, for 7 years, operated Harrington Hall, which at the time had 112 men, at the highest 150 men, 150. And so we're well-versed in operating a large-scale shelter, as well as our expertise with our street-based outreach work. We would also be bringing in working with our current providers, medical providers, behavioral healthcare providers, harm reduction folks that we work closely with. So this would really become a hub of services for people to be connected to those critical resources until they can get into housing. So this would certainly not be a warehousing as it has been characterized. It would be absolutely a service enriched environment to help keep people safe and stable until they can get into housing.
Is 30 your max for the support service network that you currently have?
So for Echo Village, we've been building this as 30 units. And so each would have 2 people in them. So for 60 total. But honestly, Madam Chair, between you and I'd love to create one for every single unsheltered person in this state. So I'll go big. I'll swing for the fences if I get some assistance to do so.
I love working with you already, Laura.
Unfortunately, I'm not. We're not Providence Jaworskis, though. I'm sorry. It's my Irish side that's Providence.
Well, you need to, sorry, you did the first name. You need to make, this board is lovely, right? So Laura, I guess swing from the fences is great. I love it. But my question to you is, what is your capacity to support these individual units? What is the maximum number that you can support with the existing support structures you have? That's the number I need to know. And what is that number?
30 units to support 60 unsheltered individuals. That's the model that we've been crafting our budget around.
And you have a support system, a network that can support those people. Okay, great.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Has anyone done this, Echo? Is there any municipality in the state of Rhode Island that has done this?
No, Madam Chair.
Pawtucket, I heard you mention Pawtucket. What happened in Pawtucket?
The zoning official was cautious of this kind of a project.
All righty.
So that's what was a critical difference in Providence, was the zoning official was really open to this as a creative idea. I want to just quickly add these units are typically used in other parts of the country as an outdoor model, but it's because they have more temperate climates, right? So they don't have to worry about extreme weather. usually going the colder way. And so by putting these indoors, we mitigate a number of code challenges that we would be facing by setting them up outside because they're not permanent structures. But when we brought them indoors, we actually also set another really interesting precedent where I received Fire Safety Board approval in July to set this project up, which is pretty incredible. So if we're successful in doing this, we will be the first in the nation to set this up as an indoor village using these structures.
Okay. Well, that sounds very interesting, and I thank you for your presentation and your hard work.
Thank you.
Anybody else on this topic?
Not on that topic, but if I could go back to
Brenda Clement has another question.
Amy, do you know the hotel voucher numbers for Providence? How many vouchers we currently have out or being used?
I don't know specifically for Providence.
What's the state number?
Let me pull up a report quick. Hang on.
Thank you. Total stuff oh. I think she's looking it up, so I think we can move on.
Okay, well, who is presenting? I guess Laura was presenting, utilize all resources available from the federal government. Who's going to cover that topic?
Sure, I can quickly cover it. I want to respect folks' time. But again, these are more tools that can be utilized. The first is the city of Providence can actually do what Boston just did the other day. And they actually declared homelessness and addiction as a public health crisis. Other cities have done this as a state of emergency. And what this does is it allows for additional levers to be pulled. So unfortunately, I have a pandemic to draw a parallel to, but you remember when we did declare a state of emergency around COVID-19, what that allowed was for a lot of doors to be opened. And so similarly, this might allow for, well, it expresses a sense of urgency and gives attention to the crisis that it is. So there's absolutely an importance that is communicated in the recognition of this critical issue. But it also could perhaps open up any zoning restrictions that might be in place, allow things to move through an approval process more in a more expedited manner. It might even allow for more funding to become available. But it's something that we absolutely encourage the city to take a look at, as other municipalities or counties or even states have done so. So the next would be also just making sure that we're maximizing the use of our stimulus funds that are available, just continuing to keep the pedal on the gas for all of these resources that have been coming into the city to get them out the door as quickly as possible, either for prevention and diversion and for ending folks' homelessness status for now. And then, of course, the symbolic gesture of joining the House America initiative that is going on right now through HUD. This is also a really critical step in this process to make sure that we're using the American Rescue Plan dollars to address the issue of homelessness.
Wonderful. Questions, committee members? I was going to say council members, but there's none here. It automatically comes out of my mouth. Okay, so that's a wrap on that presentation. I want to thank, I see a, thank you, Donna.
I think she's probably getting back to me about the hotel number.
Amy Ferguson.
Yeah.
Yes, so as of the 13th of October, we had 100 rooms with a total of 162 people in those rooms, and those hotels are scattered throughout the state.
Okay, thanks, Amy. And one more question about vouchers. When do they expire? Do we have
the
to
hotel
use them?
program?
Hotel program, I thought there was an expiration date on that. No? Okay, never mind.
So statewide, what was the number of hotel vouchers?
As of the 13th of October, we had 100 hotel rooms with a total of 162 people in them.
Okay. All right. Do we know how many are in Providence?
She doesn't.
Very few. I can look into it, but I know it's not many. We've not had very good luck with engaging with hotels in Providence throughout this entire project.
So to clarify, there will be people from Providence utilizing the hotel vouchers, staying in hotels outside of the city.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else? You good, Brenda?
I am, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was great. It was a great discussion, and it's provided us a good foundation for this committee's work. With that, Madam Clerk, let's read item 2 into the record.
Update on inventory of available city buildings. The following have been invited. Emily Friedman, Director of Community Development.
Good
Emily, take it away.
Good evening. Emily Friedman, Director of Community Development within Department of Planning and Development. If you'll indulge me first, I just wanted to give a brief bit of background and some info on some peripheral pieces here to add a little bit of context to the conversation. So as was alluded to earlier, since the onset of the pandemic and as a response to the growing number of unsheltered, there have been multiple parties, the providers such as Laura, the State Homeless Response Task Force, the city, and others who've been working to identify locations for additional overflow shelter, emergency housing, and permanent supportive housing, such as buildings and hotels. The Consolidated Homeless Fund, which is a partnership and a consortium comprised of the state of Rhode Island and the Rhode Island urban entitlement cities, such as Providence and Pawtucket, have made available funds, so our Emergency Solutions Grant through the CARES Act, Social Service Block Grants, Housing Resource Commission funds, to enable nonprofit providers to add overflow beds in new or existing spaces, and to provide additional resources for rapid rehousing, street outreach, and services to address this additional rise in clients during the pandemic. For context, the Consolidated Homeless Fund recently issued an RFP for non-congregate shelter providers. This closed Monday, I believe Eileen referenced. So there's going to be a slate of proposals that are going to be under review to bring additional beds online, if possible, for the November 1st to March 31st period. So that decision process will be made shortly. If additional funding is needed to support those asks, I sit on that committee and will be happy to notify this committee if additional funding is needed to ensure that we're maximizing the number of beds that we can bring online. I will clarify that the City of Providence itself does not currently own or operate any shelters or housing, but we do fund multiple privately owned and operated facilities through the Consolidated Homeless Fund. So in support of these efforts, and as part of our more general, broader planning efforts around housing and redevelopment, city staff has been working actively to compile draft working lists of city-owned parcels. So for our purposes in the casting of our net, we're defining city-owned as parcels owned by the City of Providence, Providence Public Building Authority, and the Water Supply Board, and the Providence Redevelopment Agency. So we are currently evaluating for parcels that fall under that ownership structure, both vacant lots as well as lots with structures. The refinement of these lists is ongoing so that we can confirm vacancy or occupancy status, whether if a vacant lot is buildable or non-buildable, what zoning applies, and whether an active redevelopment plan or process is in play on that particular parcel. The data is also, as needed, being confirmed via field inspection. Sometimes we need to lay eyes on a property to say whether it is or isn't available for redevelopment. So our hope is to be able to share a vetted, reliable list as soon as possible. As we touched upon earlier in the City of Providence, in terms of a shelter conversation, we have a very flexible zoning code as it currently exists. So temporary emergency housing, so temporary shelter is permitted in, I believe, 17 of the 20 zones under the city's zoning ordinance. The exception is zones W3 and M2, which are what we would classify as heavy industrial, our working waterfront and our very industrial zones where residential uses are not appropriate. More permanent transitional shelter is available in 7 zones, or is permitted by right in 7 zones, or 4 zones. So basically at this point, in terms of getting a project like Echo Village approved, what we're looking for is compliance with general life safety compliance and basic building code. So ADA accessibility, fire code, access, and a life safety plan. And the city can and does does assist providers by ensuring that we are operating a timely and streamlined permitting process. So it is nice to hear Laura's feedback that our development process and our permitting process has been a pleasant experience and streamlined compared to other municipalities.
Don't get me started, Emily.
Well, what I would like to flag as a consideration for this committee and flag as a gap in data is that we don't have a good handle on what is state-owned and vacant or surplus. If we are looking for detailed information on state-owned or surplus properties, that would need to be requested. I think it makes sense potentially under this task force to explore the city's right of refusal on state surplus properties. As I currently understand it, the notice goes to the clerk's office and the Providence Journal, but opportunities may potentially be getting missed in the current process as it stands. Periodically, the state surpluses out properties, and that process is not, I would say, well advertised to nonprofits or housing providers. What we could do is think about encouraging a commitment that surplus properties meeting certain conditions potentially be removed from auction and placed in the Rhode Island housing or another land bank. I think, of course, to harken back to the earlier conversation, neighborhood support is also a significant factor in site selection. I think we do need to collectively agree that there's a growing need, and the level of human suffering in our city means that we have a collective obligation to ensure that our constituents are afforded the basic safety and dignity of housing. I think we need to collectively agree that we should not be comfortable with 87 people sleeping in cars every night in the city of Providence, and a shelter wait list that numbers in the hundreds. So my hope is that we, in our capacity as leaders, can balance the needs of our constituents with this growing emergency. And then finally, I would just make a point of saying that we need to be connecting the dots between all of these conversations. I recently had the pleasure of joining our ARPA task force to make recommendations, which very much aligned with the presentation that we heard today, that we need to be supporting setting aside our ARPA dollars for short-term and long-term housing needs. We need to support non-congregate shelter projects and associated services. We need to continue to boost rapid rehousing and rental assistance, and we need to be constructing deeply affordable housing with whatever development opportunities currently exist and as quickly as possible. And then I think the gap in diversion resources could potentially also be addressed with ARPA. So that may be, if I could suggest, a topic for further consideration by this.
I completely agree.
So thank you.
Brenda?
Thanks, Emily. And Emily and I work on lots of committees together, so we see each other a lot. But Emily, any sense, and I realize that the deadline's still out, but any sense as to the amount of beds you think you'll get in through the ESG process or request?
Where it closed end of day on Monday, I have not yet heard from counterparts at Office of Housing and Community Development what came in for ask. But I think the collective commitment from the state and from the municipalities that participate in the Consolidated Homeless Fund would be to let's fund what comes in and anything that's viable, let's make it work. But hopefully within the coming days.
We'll know.
Yeah, because really the goal is to have additional options coming online for November 1st for that start of what we consider the winter shelter season, November 1st to March. Okay, great. And the city list that you referenced, any time frame to when you hope to get that? Hopefully the next few weeks. Unfortunately, we're in the tough spot now of, having to go through manually and mark where they are in it. There's an active redevelopment plan that we're aware of. We're needing to do some on-site inspections. So that's we're sort of in the cumbersome part of that process right now. Can I ask, is the Urban League on that list? The Urban League is currently in state receivership. Okay. So it is on that list, but I would say that's another one that has an asterisk next to it, that's a complicated redevelopment plan. Okay.
What about the Armory?
The Armory, to my awareness, is state-owned and currently leased.
Just recently leased?
Recently leased.
North Main too?
That's a good question. That I would need to research. I'm thinking Cranston Street, which is... Well,
I think Cranston Street just because of the for an immediate solution.
I think North Main Street is state-owned, but it's definitely worth checking on a bus line, meets lots of the requirements that Laura has for, Echo Village. Laura, have you looked at that space?
No, we have not. It's a fantastic suggestion, Brenda.
It's a very good
I don't
suggestion.
think they'll like it, but.
Mr. Aiken?
I just wanted to, I'll echo the point with the ARC task force. I've been sitting on that, and the group did recommend recently that the largest single pot of funding should go to housing, which with a recommendation was 28 million, or a quarter of the money that's not for revenue recovery. The question I just wanted to ask is, are you engaging with, like some of the larger private landowners in the city as well, property owners?
Yes, I would say we've engaged with a few property owners that we know have potentially parcels that would lend themselves to a project like Echo Village, but to date have not been successful.
Does Providence Housing have any vacant property, land, buildings?
No, not kind of, vacant and unused property of any size or vacant buildings, no.
What about the parking lots that can be outside? Okay.
No, it doesn't work for the village, obviously, an outside space.
Right.
What about schools, though? Are schools on your list? We have a couple of closed schools in the city, right, at this
So
point?
closed schools are on the list. I would highlight 22 Rise Street. The city was conveyed to the Providence Redevelopment Agency. We issued an RFP, or the PRA issued an RFP in the fall during the pandemic. I think was maybe not the right moment, so we are going to be reissuing that RFP, and that lends itself to an affordable housing project, and the RFP, when it's reissued, is going to be targeted to affordable housing development. So we do have any vacant schools on the list, and we are, determining now whether they have an active redevelopment plan.
So I know Brenda asked this question, but when can we get this list? Even if it's, not a comprehensive list, what do we have working? And even if it's categories that we're still researching. I think we need to put together a working list at this point.
Okay.
Is that something that we can get out within the next week before we have our next meeting?
Speaking with my colleagues, I don't think anyone has that level of comfort yet with releasing. We're talking, in terms of a universe of city-owned, that's 479 city-owned parcels. For the PRA, that's 50 parcels. So there's, I think we need to be confident that that list is accurate before it becomes public.
I guess where I'm going with that is we just spent, 5 or 6 minutes here talking about our schools on the list, or, this type of,
Sorry. Do it without the audience.
so I just don't know if there's merit in having just a list that is like what categories we're looking at, or that are being contemplated in case we're missing something.
Sure.
That someone at this table or in this group can kind of fill in. So that's kind of where I'm like.
Sure. What we may want to think about is maybe going from a different direction. The properties that we know and are confident at this moment, and potentially releasing a shorter list.
Okay. I'd like to see a short list.
Faster approach here.
Yeah.
Time is of the essence, folks. We're not talking about a lot of beds.
No.
And I think we just need to be creative and work together to figure this out. So I think a short list would be good. Brenda?
Yeah, and I agree with you. So, so a couple of things. One is it would be good to check on hotel vacancies in the city as well too, to see if we can put if there's any way that we can reach out and create some sort of partnership with any existing hotels in the city. So that would be an immediate thing. I also think trying to work with Department of Health around how can we get those 50 beds back in the existing shelters, and what do we need to do? Do we need to create walls or air ventilation systems or other things? And I know Amy referred to that earlier, but to me that seems to be faster than some of the other things that we're talking about on this list. Obviously, as Emily's already pointed out, if there's a gap between what we've got when proposals come in for the emergency shelters, if there's a gap of money, then that's also another place, because that will create more actual physical beds as well.
So, great point, and that really is our last discussion for tonight, is next steps. Who do we need to get around the table? I keep hearing state tonight. I think it would be good to get someone from the state planning. I don't know if Mike Tundra is the appropriate person, but we need to hear from the state. How do we get these beds back online? What buildings do they have? What land do they have? How can they help us with this problem? Because it's not a Providence problem. It's a statewide issue. So who do we need to invite? And what are your thoughts on, getting people around the table for our next meeting?
I would just say that we engage routinely with our counterparts in the Office of Housing and Community Development at the state, and so we are actively in these conversations. So I don't know if it's a level higher, that perhaps it's the Division of, I may get the acronym wrong, Capital Asset Management, DCAM, who is the holder and keeper of the surplus properties at the state, if they could come and speak to their process and what they have potentially available would be helpful. I would also caution that we have, throughout the pandemic, the city, Commerce, Office of Housing and Community Development at the state, we have had ongoing conversations with hotels. And what we are repeatedly hearing is that there is not sustained availability in Providence for the winter season. And, we've called it basically every cost reasonable hotel in the city. Okay. And that, I would just say, is we feel like that's been exhausted at this point.
Okay. What about, is it Buddha, BHD, what are they doing? How do they enter into this?
Yeah, they're active on the state's homeless response team. They're very much part of these conversations.
So you're having conversations. I'd like to get them in so that we can all have conversations. Are you pointing?
Sorry, there was a hand up.
Oh, there's a hand up. Whose hand is up?
It's gone now.
Hand's gone?
It was Laura here, Laura Jaworski, and I would really second Emily's suggestion of DCAM, the Division of Capital Assets and Management, as overseeing facilities throughout the state, really having, I think, their handle on it. I'll speak for my efforts alone in really struggling to get a handle on what unused or underutilized, or even what state property is going up for sale. It's really difficult to even know what that is. And I think there's absolutely an opportunity there. And even for some policy changes to go in as you're cataloging those properties, to even make them available to nonprofits at a real sweet deal, so that we can utilize them in a crisis moment, either for shelter or for development into housing. And then yes, BHDDH would absolutely be really helpful. However, a lot of the property that BHDDH has access to are smaller single family type homes and aren't necessarily designed to be for shelter, but they may have access to other properties that might be helpful for more of a longer term development. But it would really hinge upon thinking about what the benefit would be in keeping that under state control versus city.
Okay.
Brenda, can I also recommend that we ask somebody from the Diocese of Providence from their property disposition group? I'm losing the name of the individual in that department right now, but they have been selling off a lot of property, and it would be good to see if there's any opportunities.
Okay.
And I know a number of the nonprofit groups, including some on the call, have been trying, and even when they're offering top dollar, they're not getting approval. So I'd like to hear more as to why.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? I had written down a bunch here. What about the Rhode Island Foundation? We need to get them in to see how they can help us out. I know they've been doing a lot.
Yeah, I'm not sure I mean, obviously, they have continued to focus and make housing a key recommendation, in their work. I don't know that there's anything in particular, that they can talk about property acquisition in the short term, but,
Okay.
so I wouldn't concentrate on them for the short-term stuff.
Okay, so, definitely bring in some state folks to the table. These are good ideas. Anyone out there in my Zoom audience? Laura's shaking her head. Haven't heard anything from Melissa Cinzaro from the Providence Housing Authority. Do you have any thoughts you want to share with us? Or do you want to tell us what Providence Housing is doing?
Can you hear me okay?
We surely can.
I raised my hand a couple of times, but so many of you have covered some of the things. And I'm really, sometimes my reaction is to talk about people that are housed, the people that I serve in public housing and in Section 8 who, specifically with services, are really hurting right now. So I'm trying not to focus on that. But I do believe that everything that everybody brought up today was really important. We really, really appreciate the funding that's coming in to keep people housed, to prevent homelessness. I believe that I call what's been happening since the onset of the pandemic is the ongoing aftermath has resulted in the most vulnerable of our populations needing services beyond what even nonprofits who specialize in services can provide. So with specifically people that are coming into housing or have opportunities to go into hotels and shelters, the supportive social pieces of that are so important right now. So I definitely appreciated that. We want to continue our work with, we were lucky enough to get allocated 42 emergency housing vouchers, and working with our partners in the continuum of care and several partners to get those up and running as soon as possible has been challenging, but progressing very nicely. We also have mainstream vouchers, and those two are ways that come in through, they circumvent the wait list and come in through referrals. So those mainstream vouchers have been expanded, I think in the last 3 to 4 years. I don't know the time frame exactly, Peter could tell me, but we went from 0 to 140 vouchers of mainstream vouchers. And we're also just about to award another 50 project-based vouchers that'll expand affordable housing in the community through either new construction or preservation. There's more to be done from us all. The time to be creative is now. It is now. We have all proven through the pandemic that we can do almost anything. So I'm really happy to be here today. The entire PHA staff is happy that this is going on, and looking forward to the future conversations and thinking outside of the box and thinking creatively with you all on how we can serve all of those families that are suffering and continue to support and prevent adding on to that list, which I think is essential at this moment in time.
Great, thank you, Melissa.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking me for my comments.
Couldn't let the meeting end without asking you.
I appreciate it.
Okay, so, what else? Actually, I see Christine Hunsinger is still here from Rhode Island Housing. Christine, are you still with us?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Awesome. Do you think you could put together a summary for us of some of the numbers and some of the partners that you're working with, what numbers they're returning? I'm sure you have those available to you.
I sure do. Yeah, I sure do. We have a public-facing dashboard which will break them all down and do it by municipality, and I'm happy to send over partner information.
I'd like to see the partner information, because where I was going earlier is, and you mentioned it too, looking at expanding your partnerships to make sure that we're capturing everyone, or putting everybody's shoulder to the wheel. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Nothing more, then I think that's all for this evening. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Made by Brenda Clement, seconded by Emily Friedman. All in favor, aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you all for your hard work.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.